Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a giant trucker, an Irish bar, and, of course, a Florida connection. We talked to the creator of a new podcast focusing on one of the most successful espionage endeavors in FBI history. Later in the program, the war at home. We discuss how World War II forever changed the political, financial, and physical landscape of the Sunshine State. But first, a new podcast explores how a chance meeting at a Florida bar allowed a long-haul trucker to infiltrate and ultimately defeat a violent terrorist organization. Joining us via video to tell us about it is Abdon Pallasch, co-host of the podcast Underbelly, The Rebel Kind. Welcome, Abdon.
Great to be here, and thanks so much for having me on.
It's wonderful to have you, Abdon. And we should say the podcast was recently named a finalist for 3 Sunshine State Awards by the Society for Professional Journalism. So first of all, congrats. That's great news. You used to write for the Tampa Tribune here in Florida back when it had that name, Chicago Tribune and Chicago Sun-Times more recently.
Yeah.
And now you work for the Illinois Office of the Comptroller. Tell us a little bit about how you embarked on this project.
So, excuse me, this was a story that I started working on at the Chicago Sun-Times in the 90s. Excuse me. And, I grew up in the Irish, community in Chicago, before I, came down to Florida. And every year during wintertime in Chicago, I asked myself, why did I ever come back from Florida? So we had heard, there's a fledgling peace process going on in Ireland in the 90s, and it's threatened by this breakaway faction of the IRA that wants to start the war going again to liberate all of Northern Ireland, to reunite it with Ireland. And then we hear that the head of this militant offshoot of the IRA, Mickey McKevitt, has been arrested in Dublin and charged with directing terrorism. And the main witness against him is going to be a Chicago trucker named Dave Rupert. I'm like, who the heck is David Rupert? I know all the Irish people in Chicago. I've never heard of Dave Rupert. And so I just, my colleague Bob Hergeth and I, start interviewing folks we know in the Irish community, saying, who is this Dave Rupert guy? And everyone in the group that was sympathetic to the militants, they all started downplaying their relation with Dave Rupert. Oh, he came in here and set up a few chairs at a couple of meetings, but he didn't really have much to. Oh, he was right in the middle of it. He was in the thick of it. And so our question was this a guy who came in as a mole to begin with, or was he a true believer who was turned or sold out? But there's no way to reach him. Dave Rupert, the Chicago trucker, the mole who's going to be the undoing of the real IRA, is in witness protection. We can't get at him.
Abdon, before you continue, let me just dial it back for one quick second, because there's a lot of history I want to get to about the IRA and about Dave Rupert and kind of how he got involved. But I want to start with just sort of like, how did you first contact him? Because this podcast is actually based on recordings that you made like 2 decades ago.
Yeah. The opportunity sort of fell into my lap. As we're looking for Dave Rupert, who's in hiding, he is looking to have his story told. He's looking to have someone do his biography. And he happens upon my friend Flynn McRoberts, who has one of the most Irish names in Chicago journalism. He's writing for the Chicago Tribune at the time. And Flynn knows that I was, I studied in Ireland. I was into this stuff. So he invites me to be part of this, book writing venture, writing about Rupert's life. And so we go to meet with Dave, and he wants to contract with someone to write his life. And I make it clear that if we do this, this is not going to be a hagiography. We are going to tell all Rupert's, his bankruptcies, his divorces, the whole warts and all story, and he's totally cool with that.
Is it true? Is it true that he contacted your co-worker or your co-author initially on this project, Flynn McRoberts, because he had the most Irish-sounding name that he could find in Chicago journalism?
That's part of it. I mean, Flynn McRoberts, even though McRoberts is technically a Scottish name,
Okay.
Flynn's Irish. But it was also, there was a connection where a lawyer that Rupert knew had a friend who knew both Flynn and me. But he liked the name. So that helped.
Okay. And so Flynn, who was at the Tribune, contacted you. You were at the Chicago Sun-Times. Eventually, Flynn had to kind of move on because he had another
Yes.
book project that he was working on. And so you brought on another colleague to join you on this project of interviewing um,
Yeah.
Rupert, David
Bob
Rupert.
Burkett. Yeah.
Okay.
And Bob and I we had written stories for the Sun Times about Rupert, about this whole dynamic of who is this Chicago guy who was going to be the undoing of the IRA, militant offshoot that was trying to take down the peace process.
It's an extraordinary instance. And I guess, we did mention that there's a Florida bar involved. I don't believe that you ever knew David Rupert in Florida, but it's a bar that you actually were a regular at for a while.
And I saw you had a picture up there, the old Harp and Thistle, which brought back great memories. Now that one that you've got there, that is a bar that there's so many fun parts of this whole story, but one is that the FBI, using your tax money and mine, paid Dave Rupert to open a bar on the Northern Ireland border to ingratiate himself with IRA types,
Uh-huh.
which is how part of this happened. But Dave liked hanging out in bars. He liked courting women, and so the Harp and Thistle, as I'm sure plenty of your listeners, when they've been down to the Tampa area in the '90s and early aughts, would have stopped into the Harp and Thistle. It was a great, fun Irish pub right on St. Pete Beach. I used to hang out there when I was writing for the Tampa Tribune, and I very well may have been there on the night that Dave Rupert picked up Linda Vaughn, which is what started this whole adventure.
And that was this fateful meeting. As you say, he was, I guess, a bit of a womanizer. He was married several times. He admitted that he broke up with one wife because he wanted to continue chasing women, not be hindered by a marriage. But
Yeah.
the woman that he met was actually a pretty well-known lobbyist in Tallahassee. So tell us a little bit about, who Linda Vaughn was and why her role was so central to him kind of becoming connected with Republican Irish activists.
Yeah. Linda Vaughn was an amazing woman who I think is one of the undertold stories of Florida. She was a powerhouse lobbyist in Tallahassee. She is the reason you cannot smoke indoors in Florida. She helped pass that. She took on the big industry, took on the gun industry. She was the Brady campaign's person in Florida trying to pass what we now call common sense gun laws, what they then called gun control. Um, she passed the McBride Principles, which was saying that Florida companies could not invest in companies in Northern Ireland that discriminated against Catholics. She was very into Irish causes. She was also just before Dave met her, she was the Florida campaign manager for Paul Tsongas, who was trying to topple Bill Clinton in the '92 Democratic presidential primary. Bill Clinton eventually won that. But Linda Vaughn was very well known. When I approached the former Speaker of the House, Peter Rudy Wallace, he was Speaker when I was, covering politics for the Tampa Tribune back in the '90s. And his law office, I said, do you remember Linda Vaughn? And he said, the red-haired tear? Are you kidding? Everyone in Tallahassee knew Linda Vaughn. Lars Hafner, who was a former state rep, who represented the area that was included the Harp and Thistle pub. He was a regular at the pub, and he was the state rep representing the area. We met up at the old Harp and Thistle, which is now the Oyster Shucker on St. Pete Beach. And he recounted, we're working with Linda on legislation, that she was very aggressive, she came in, she had her facts straight, she would bowl you over, and she was a force to be reckoned with, he said.
And so she, in addition to being a powerful voice in Tallahassee and one that was sort of well remembered, she also became very involved in the cause in Ireland. She did some fundraising. She, according to her husband that you spoke to in your research, was the only
Mhm.
American invited onto this stage with the mothers of hunger strikers at this rally in the 80s that was, part of a major um, resistance movement against the British occupation of Northern Ireland or the British control of Northern Ireland. And so she was actually kind of a key figure. Well, I'll let you tell the story, but she would actually be responsible for passing messages to some
Yeah.
prisoners.
And I had not heard this in my earlier research when Bob and stories back in the '90s when this first came out. But So Linda's eventual husband, Kevin Magn, he was a Irish musician that she met after her time with Dave Rupert, and they married. They would play music for like Jimmy Carter's birthdays up in Georgia. So Kevin was a talented musician, pretty well known. um, he talked about how Linda would she would visit the prisoners in Ireland, IRA members who had been arrested and in prison, and they don't have much contact with their families. It's all very strictly controlled. So she would meet with their families, and they'd write little messages and fold it up on small pieces of paper, and then put that in little bits of tinfoil. She would put them in her mouth. She would go to the prisons to meet with the political prisoners, give them a kiss, and pass the messages through her mouth to them that they could read later. So she was right in the middle of the armed struggle, the American Support Network. And if we take a step back here, America has been such a part of the whole Northern Ireland struggle. Britain invaded Ireland back in, a millennia ago, and occupied it for centuries, leading to a whole lot of, hard feelings on the part of the Irish that did not like being subjugated by the British. But for centuries now, the British moved into Northern Ireland, settled their people there. And when the rest of Ireland was able to win independence from Britain back in the early 20th century, the Northern Ireland stayed part of Britain. That was sort of the compromise that allowed them to end the War of Independence. But it was a rough go up there, especially starting in the 60s, when the Catholics who wanted more rights, felt very oppressed by the British government there, started using the tactics of the American civil rights movement to resist the British and seek independence. It was war back and forth. Um, and American supporters played a big role in that. In fundraising, the Irish would come here, and Irish Americans do very well here in this country, in Florida and everywhere else, and they would send money back to what they thought was the noble cause of helping, free the Irish from Britain. It wasn't always noble, in that sometimes the money would go to the IRA that would use it for bombs. It would sometimes kill civilians. So it was a very difficult struggle on both sides. Um, I'm probably going a little off the question just asked about Linda Vaughn's role in it.
Well, she was a big fundraiser, as you say. I mean, there was a lot, especially in Chicago, in that area, people, families contributing to NORAID. And in fact, in the context of this podcast, you were able to, kind of explore some of your own family history. I mean, your mom is part of this podcast, right? You talked to her about her personal history, some of which was fairly traumatic.
So I've been raised, and there's some quote about one of the was it Queen Victoria? One of them say that the Irish get this resentment of the British in their mother's milk. Um, my mom would tell us stories. Really, my grandma told us stories about when my grandmother was a young girl, one of 16 kids growing up in rural, West Kerry in Ireland, and her uncle had been teaching Irish, to students, and that was forbidden. She said in those times that they were trying to stamp out the Irish language and have everyone speak English. And so she had to watch her uncle dragged to death. They got the kids out on the front porch, and they tied half of them to a truck and dragged them down the street. So that does foster a hell of a lot of resentment. They say that the old joke about Irish holding a grudge is Irish Alzheimer's. You forget everything but a grudge.
Mm.
So I was raised early on that the British are the enemy. We need to get them out of Ireland. They've been gotten out of 26 of the 32 counties of Ireland, but the 6 northeasternmost counties that formed Northern Ireland were still under British rule. And when I was a kid, my mom would take us to picnics put on by NORAID, Irish Northern Aid, which was a group that raised money ostensibly to help the families of the Irish political prisoners, the IRA members imprisoned in Northern Ireland, but which the CIA and the Irish government say no, they're giving money to fund the military campaign of the IRA. So yeah, that was a part of my life growing up.
If you're just joining us, we are talking to Abdon Pallasch. He is the co-host of the podcast Underbelly, The Rebel Kind. We're talking about a podcast that just won a number of nominations from the Society of Professional Journalism. If you have questions or comments, you can join the conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. So we're talking about the IRA broadly, Abdon, but the part of the IRA that David Rupert infiltrated was a very violent kind of subset or splinter group called the real IRA. They were sort of emerging as the country was moving, sort of with the help of the United States towards, a peace deal of some kind. The Good Friday Accords, which ultimately would kind of help, bring that long simmering and very brutal conflict to sort of an end. But there was people who didn't support the movement towards the Good Friday Accords, and the real IRA emerged as kind of one of the chief splinter groups that wanted to continue the fight.
Right. And the whole history of Irish resistance to British rule has been one of the British know if they can split the Irish amongst themselves and get them arguing with each other, it does their work for them. And so you'd have the Irish fighters who fought to get rid of Britain, but then they fight to a stalemate and are willing to do a compromise. And those that don't want to compromise versus those that are willing to compromise, so they can get out of the war zones. That's been the history of the Irish struggle, and that happened when, in 1916, the deal that allowed it was a few years after, it was the early 1920s, the deal that allowed most of Ireland its freedom in exchange for leaving the six northeasternmost counties with Britain, divided the Irish between those who thought it was an acceptable compromise versus those who thought it was a sellout.
It sparked
And
a
like
civil war, right? I
it
mean, that
did,
was, yeah.
The Wind That Shakes the Barley is a very brutal, a good movie to watch if you want a nice segment of that. Um, so in the 90s, you've got Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, who are the sort of the leaders of the IRA that are trying to bring it now from the militant approach to into the political realm. They're trying to convert it from a military movement to a political movement, the Sinn Féin party. And they're saying, we'll do the deal with the British, where we agreed to lay down our arms and they let our people out of prison, and then we run for office and we try to win independence for Northern Ireland through the ballot box, not through the bombs. And this is a tough sell with a lot of their members who had been fighting their whole life, and like, what did we fight and so many of our comrades die for, to now agree to let to be elected to the British Parliament. So the leader of one of these militant factions was Mickey McKevitt, and he started a group that came to be known as the Real IRA. But when Dave Rupert is getting involved with this, at this point, these splinter groups are just starting to splinter off. You've got one called the Continuity IRA, and one of the guys that Dave Rupert meets up with is a pub owner in Bundoran in County Donegal, Joe O'Neill, he's a singer, he's a pub owner, and he's also on the side very involved in the Continuity IRA, one of the splinter groups. There's another guy, Vince Murray, who is in Sligo, which Linda Vaughan has arranged for Tallahassee and Sligo to be sister cities. So she goes over a lot and meets with Vince, and when she and Rupert start dating, she brings Rupert over there, and he starts meeting these pub owners and getting friendly with them, because he's an amiable guy. He's sort of happy-go-lucky trucker, and he's just dating Linda Vaughan. He's not Irish. He has no interest no vested interest in what's going on in Northern Ireland. But the pub owners find a captive audience, and they start trying to educate him on 800 years of Irish history and why he should be upset about the British presence in Northern Ireland.
And you say that Linda Vaughn kind of transferred this instant credibility because she was so involved in the cause in Ireland and kind of helping to raise money for Northern Ireland and all of these things that she was doing. So he was kind of immediately embraced and trusted, but he also, kind of in an almost offhand way, endorsed this approach of violence in a conversation that he was having with some of these members of these, factional IRA groups. talking about the lessons of Vietnam, can you kind of explain what it was that he was saying that persuaded them that he might be a true ally in their some very often violent cause?
And he had walked in on Linda Vaughn's arms, so it's immediately assumed that Dave Rupert's okay, that he's one of us because Linda Vaughn is such a beloved American, Irish American supporter of the cause. So when these pub owners are expressing their frustrations of trying to get Britain out of Northern Ireland, and Dave Rupert says to them, "Well, it's just like it's like Vietnam. You're just not sending enough body bags home to England. That's how the Vietnamese won the war." And he really meant that as sort of just a statement of fact, as an observation. But they took that as an endorsement of their whole approach. They're like, oh, good, he's one of us. He became an instant local hero.
And so he begins hanging with through Linda with some of these pub owners, and really it was just kind of that incidental acquaintance that he was making that led to this the FBI essentially to approach him and ask him to spy on behalf of their organization and ultimately MI5, the British military intelligence organization. Um, they tell us. I mean, it was kind of someone snapped a picture of him with these Irish IRA members.
Yeah, he's hanging out with them, and the Garda, the Irish word for police is Garda. The Garda trucks go by, and Vincey Murray and Joe O'Neill both say, "Oh, look, they've got your picture now too." And Dave doesn't think anything of it. He breaks up with Linda. Dave tended to cycle through women. He's now been married to his wife Maureen for more than 30 years. They're very happy. But at that point in his life, he was cycling through women very quickly, and that's one of the ways he endeared himself to some of these guys, is telling them all the stories about his ex-wives, and they all find it very entertaining. This wealthy American who's able to have money to travel to Ireland, and all his ex-wives and what he. But he's back in his trucking office in Chicago a year later, and the FBI comes in, and he's wondering, what the heck does the FBI want with me? And he starts thinking of all the shady business deals he's done over his lifetime. Is this the $750,000 he owes to the IRS? Does this have anything to do with his brother's arrest for hauling a ton of marijuana through Florida and getting arrested, in Fort Lauderdale, and having to do 18 months at Okeechobee Correctional Center? All these things are running through his head. And then the FBI agent, Ed Buckley, slaps down these pictures of him with Vincey Murray and Joe O'Neill. And Rupert was relieved. He's like, oh, is that all? Those are just drinking buddies. And he didn't have any, ties to Ireland. He wasn't Irish. So O'Neill says to him, how'd you like to go to work for, I'm sorry, the FBI agent, Ed Buckley, says to him, how'd you like to go to work for us spying on your friends? And he thinks about it a little bit, and he says, okay, if they're going to send me to Ireland, I enjoy going to Ireland. I can keep my ears open and pass information back to them. And that's how this whole thing started.
And he, thought about it because he wasn't, necessarily like a diehard, not necessarily a spy by nature. I mean, you describe him as kind of the opposite of James Bond physically in his
Yes.
appearance, kind of a giant of a man. But he became concerned that the cause was ending up, taking the lives of innocents, and not necessarily, purely focused on a liberation, but was actually, targeting people that were civilians in every way. And so he agrees to do this spy measure. He goes and he eventually kind of persuades the FBI to essentially buy him a bar that he starts to run as cover.
And I encourage you all to listen to the podcast. You can find it on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your finer podcasts. Underbelly, the Rebel Kind. And it's deadly serious stuff, but there's always also so many fun stories. The whole idea of the FBI paying this trucker to open a pub in Ireland, just this side of the Northern Ireland border, that was frequented by a lot of Northern Irish IRA supporters who are coming and spending their holidays there. It's just, you don't picture James Bond, mopping up vomit off the bar floor, which is, this guy just had the everyday travails of trying to run a pub where a whole lot of heavy drinking IRA supporters are hanging out. And it's not so much politics as just keeping them from killing themselves.
Right.
There's some great funny stories. But the crazy thing about the scheme actually worked. You wouldn't have thought that a 6'7" Protestant would be able to fool the likes of Mickey McKevitt, the cunning leader of the real IRA, who's spent a lifetime being able to spot, British spies coming. But Rupert is able to pull this off just through, having a good knack as a storyteller and having a way with people.
And he, ultimately became, as you call it, the FBI's secret weapon. At some point, his role as this undercover agent came to a head because while the FBI had one set of goals, British intelligence had a sort of different set of goals. British intelligence essentially wanted him to kind of stay there and keep providing intelligence information for the long haul, but the FBI had kind of different aims.
He's able to move his way up to Mickey McKevitt, which the British never expected, because he starts off on the west coast of Ireland there with these, like, Joe O'Neill is not really a powerhouse. He's with sort of the sleepier branch of the IRA militant breakaway factions. And so for Rupert to be able to parlay that into a meeting and then eventually working his way to be damn near the right-hand man to Mickey McKevitt, because and part of it is Rupert becomes the bagman in good Chicago fashion, where he's infiltrated these IRA support groups in Chicago, and he says, well, I'm going to Ireland anyway, let me bring the money over. You show up in Northern Ireland with bags full of American cash, they're happy to see you. So Mickey McKevitt is happy that this American is showing so much interest in the cause, and he really allows himself to be taken in by Rupert, to the point then that when Rupert begins to accumulate enough information, the various folks in the British, Irish, and U.S. government say, why don't we charge McKevitt and take him out of action? The more cautious types say, no, just stay there. This was only meant to be a surveillance operation. And that's all Rupert signed up for. He did not sign up to be in the spotlight testifying in court, but they eventually persuaded him. And part of that was the Omagh bomb, which we get into in the podcast in a big way. But that's when Mickey McKevitt and the Continuity IRA, both of them had a hand in it, but they set off a bomb in a picturesque little town of Omagh in Northern Ireland, in the downtown shopping district, where you got all these moms and kids shopping on a summer holiday for their school uniforms. And it goes off right in the middle and blows up 31 people, mostly women and children. And it really does turn public opinion in Ireland against these IRA militants. And it also helped persuade Rupert that, hey, it's worth taking the risk of testifying against McKevitt.
And we should say we're looking at a picture now, for those who are watching our live stream, of a photo that was taken just moments before the car bomb. There's a photo that shows the car that exploded moments later in Omagh that took the lives of 31 people. But there was no small risk to David Rupert either, as you talk about. I mean, there was very much the chance that if he was caught, he even says he was less worried about dying and more worried about I think he says, the 3 days of having my fingers cut off beforehand, because he knew that the penalty for that kind of betrayal was incredibly severe.
He was playing with fire this whole time, and he, luckily for him, escaped with his life.
Well, it is a fascinating podcast. There is so much history to be discovered, and as you say, the trial and kind of what the outcome of that Omagh bombing is also heavily covered in the podcast. But it's a 12-part, very riveting, and I encourage everybody to check it out. It's called Underbelly: The Rebel Kind. The co-host is Abdon Pallasch. Abdon, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
And thanks so much for having me on. Everybody give the podcast a try.
All right. Thank you. Up next, from Nazi spies in Ponte Vedra to Girl Scouts with rifles, we explore the impact of 2 world wars on the life and culture of the First Coast. Welcome back. For coastal residents of Florida, Pearl Harbor literally brought war to their backyard. A new exhibit at the Beaches Museum aims to capture how that era changed the physical and cultural landscape of the First Coast. Here to tell us about it is Susan Gold. She is the museum's archives and collections manager. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning.
We are also joined by Jacksonville Beach Mayor Chris Hoffman, who is the museum's executive director. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Anne.
So, this exhibit covers actually kind of the impact of both world wars on the coastline of Florida.
It covers all the way from the 1500s all the way up to 2007.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to start, if it's okay, later with kind of after
Mhm.
Pearl Harbor, because this was something that dramatically turned a lot of this part of the state into kind of an armed camp. Can you describe the metamorphosis? What happened to some of the public buildings? What happened to some of the
Sure.
establishments?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beaches area ended up getting taken over. Honestly, I mean, we started with Mayport. We started getting Mayport Naval Station. We ended up with Camp Atlantic Beach. We also um, ended up getting the U.S. Coast Guard patrolling the beaches as well. So we had lots of different military installations. Casa Marina ended up being used for military housing as well. So we had
That was a
lot of
hotel at the time?
uh huh
Okay.
yeah.
And so the military kind of, I guess, took over these places and just said they're going to become.
Yeah, so, out at Mayport, eminent domain was used to take over a lot of people's land, including Elizabeth Stark, who had a, lovely resort at the time, and so it just sort of became government land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's barracks emerging, there's military bases, being created. One of the people that is helping to shape this discussion of the World War history on Florida's first coast is a guy named Elliot Kleinberg, who's going
Mhm,
to be part of this, educational effort. He's going to be speaking
mhm.
at the museum. So tell us a little bit about, why you're bringing him in, what his area of expertise is.
So, one of the things that we try to do when we have our temporary exhibits in place is have some programming that is associated with that. So, with this particular exhibit, we received some grant funding through Florida Humanities, and that allows us to go out and seek real experts in areas that maybe they live outside. We have wonderful experts here in Jacksonville, and we always like to use them when we can. But Elliot Kleinberg was one that was a Florida Humanities speaker specifically on World War II. And so we're going to be bringing him into at the Beaches Museum on August 7th. So we're excited to have him as a speaker, as well as we're going to be having a cemetery tour, which is not as spooky as it sounds, but it's going to be a walking tour of the Warren H. Smith Cemetery in Jacksonville Beach that we're going to be going around through some of the veterans, some of the more prominent veterans that are buried there. And that's going to be the weekend right before Veterans Day. So we try to have not just the exhibit on the walls, but some active programming for our members and our visitors and our residents to really engage with the topic.
And Elliot Kleinberg is, he worked for 50 years at the Palm Beach Post. He's written a number of columns, a number of books, and he really is, kind of steeped in this history of Florida.
Exactly. And we're really excited to bring that expertise right to Jacksonville Beach, to the Beaches Museum.
So, Susan, I want to ask you about, the role that offshore battle was happening.
Mhm.
What impact that was having on this part of Florida, because there were a number of boats that were targeted by German U-boats. It was a commercial shipping channel that was actually chosen sort of by Hitler
Mhm.
as a target.
Yeah, absolutely. It was called Operation Drumbeat, was sort of the thing that was happening at the time. We had U-boats coming over from Europe. They left from Paris, and they came over to kind of make a big noise, essentially against the coast of America. We had one ship was destroyed off the Jacksonville Beach Pier. So we had bright lights going on the Jacksonville Beach Pier. There was not a blackout order that was being enforced at the time. So the bright lights at the pier allowed the U-boat to see the SS Gulf America at the time, and they torpedoed it and then came around and used tracer bullets to kind of take it to sink that ship. So
You have, I think, an extraordinary exhibit too at the museum of this telegram that was sent after that ship was torpedoed, basically saying, don't y'all think maybe you should turn off the lights,
Mhm.
at the amusement park?
Yeah.
Because by illuminating the coast, you essentially caused this ship to be visible and
Yes.
sunk.
Yes. So that is actually from the State Archives of Florida. That's going to be visible in this exhibit. We also, in this exhibit, have for the first time some artifacts from the wreck of the Gulf of America that were brought up by some divers.
Yeah.
So that's an exciting thing to also see in this
And
one.
I think that event was a real wake up call for the beach's residents because, again, they weren't really enforcing the blackouts and the war was something that was kind of further away from them. So we have a lot of firsthand accounts of people that actually witnessed it. Certainly, we're losing some of those firsthand accounts as the years go by, but we've been very happy to be able to capture some of those in our archives and collections. But it was festive. It was an amusement park. There was a dance hall on the pier. Everybody, I think it was a Saturday night. Everyone was out having a great time. And all of a sudden, it was an oil tanker. It lit the sky on fire. And I think it really, really very quickly brought World War II home to the First Coast beaches.
Yeah, I
areas.
mean, there's, descriptions of, these U-boat bombings that led to, people who'd been on the ship coming ashore in lifeboats covered in oil,
Hmm.
burns, broken bones, just in
Yeah.
terrible condition. And when that's coming up on the coastline, that really does change perceptions of
Hmm.
peril and kind of everybody's experience of that war.
Absolutely. I mean, children were out playing, and, still on the boardwalk that night. And that's at least three of the firsthand accounts that we have in the collection are from children between ages 10 and 16, right? So that's the memories that we have that are still in the collection.
And it was such a prominent event that there is a historic marker out on the
Mhm.
boardwalk now near the pier, as well as a memorial to those that were lost on the SS Gulf America in Jacksonville Beach's Memorial Park.
And I think in addition to that ship that sunk, I mean, a lot of people don't realize, but there's kind of these skeletons of sunken vessels
Mhm.
along the coastline that are all relics
Mhm.
of World War II.
Yeah, we have a map in the exhibit that shows all of the different boats that were sunk as well on
So
the coast.
as the ship channel is being attacked, there are these ways that people on shore are experiencing it. This blackout, becomes a real focal point for coastal authorities. There's also like civilian involvement,
Mhm.
and it echoes something that happened during World War I, which is a really interesting story that you include in this exhibit about this woman who actually organized Girl Scouts. Will you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
Elizabeth Stark?
Absolutely. So Elizabeth Stark came to the area in 1913, but when the war broke out, she decided, or I guess when we got involved in the war, she decided that the way that she was going to contribute was to start this Girl Scout troop, and she was going to patrol the beaches and make sure that there weren't any German spies that were going to come ashore and infiltrate her area. So she trained girls from ages 12 to 16 in horsemanship and marksmanship, and she armed and mounted a whole bunch of Girl Scouts, and they patrolled the beaches after school and on the weekends. And then the women of Mayport took over when they were in school.
And we have a picture that is part of your exhibit. It's
Hmm.
from the Beaches Museum collection, that shows the horseback, patrol.
Yeah,
And
that's
I mean, it
Elizabeth.
really is kind of extraordinary to imagine Girl Scouts, armed with rifles, riding horseback, and
Yeah.
sort of looking for suspicious people. And it kind of makes you wonder what the merit badge is for that. Um,
Right.
We
but
might respond differently today
yeah,
if we
Right.
were to see that on
Well,
Jacksonville
and would
Beach.
you arm I would not. I don't know if you know any 12-year-olds you would arm, but I no.
well, Elizabeth Stark was very involved, and in the end, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but it didn't end up serving her terribly
No.
well, did it?
No, she actually went to Washington and talked to people in government about how this area of the coastline would be really important in war and that they should defend it. And then they ended up coming back to her during World War II and said, "Oh, you're right.
That's a
Actually,
great idea.
yeah, that's a great idea. Actually, we're going to take this land by eminent domain and we're going to build a base on it. So thanks for that tip."
Her land.
Yeah, her land specifically, as well as others that lived in the Mayport area.
Yeah, so they
She wasn't the only
basically took that, and that is now
one.
what
Mhm.
we know as Mayport Naval
And
Station.
her
Yeah.
estate was called Wonderwood, which you
Mhm.
may recognize because that's the name of the bridge
Mhm.
and the road that is over there near where her
And
estate
it
was.
sort of left her kind of destitute,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Her husband was ill at the time. She could not fight that kind of land grab by the government. So she ended up in kind of a trailer area at the end of her life, not quite in the beautiful building that did become the officers' club on the base. So,
I do want to just touch on another incident that happened that a lot of people are maybe a little bit more familiar with, which is when these Nazi saboteurs
yeah.
came ashore in Ponte Vedra Beach, and it's an amazing story.
Yes, Operation Pastorius was they had two they had two groups of boats that landed on the east coast of the United States. They came ashore from a U-boat on a little raft, and four of them came ashore in Long Island, four came ashore in Ponte Vedra, and then they were supposed to meet up in the middle, and they were going to bomb sort of railways and roadways and different war production facilities, and sort of essentially just terror attacks was the idea. So they didn't actually end up getting to do that. They ended up getting caught because their leader of the mission reported into the FBI about them.
Turned them in.
Mm-hmm.
But they came
Exactly.
ashore, I mean, with a lot of aims and missions, but not a lot of gear or equipment.
No, they buried some explosives, some TNT in the dunes of Ponte Vedra, and then they left them there. So I'm not clear on exactly the process of how they were going to get back down. They were supposed to meet up in Cincinnati, like near Cincinnati, and then they were supposed to come all the way back down to Ponte Vedra to get the stuff. I'm not sure who planned this, but this one wasn't, I don't think, the best executed mission.
They were, though, I mean, they did, there's now a historic marker, is that right? Kind of
Mhm.
outside is it at the Ponte Vedra?
It's at the Ponte Vedra Club.
Yeah.
It was further down the beach, closer to the actual location, but it kept getting kind of vandalized or stolen, so they moved it to a little more secure location. But it is there to mark the area where they came ashore.
And so, obviously, there's many ways that these two world wars kind of shaped the coastline. And we even see, Camp Landing, which was named after one of the, I think, generals in the battle, is now being looked at as kind of a very current detention center. Previously served as a POW camp, though, and so there's many ways that those wars kind of impacted not just the beaches, but all of Florida. So this exhibit, Chris, it's called Beachfront Homefront, and I guess it kicks off.
It's going to open next Friday. We
Okay.
always do an opening reception, so it'll be at the Beaches Museum from 6 to 8. So it'll be everyone's first look at the exhibit, although it will continue to be open until just past Veterans Day. So we want to have a good long time for our visitors and our community to come and see the exhibit. We're open 6 days a week, Tuesday through Sunday, and the Beaches Museum is free. So we encourage people to come by, take a look and learn about this. Just really, and these are just a few stories of just a really fascinating history. And I think arguably the biggest and longest lasting impact is Naval Station Mayport.
Yeah.
On our beaches area as an employer, as the use of land and all that comes with that. So we continue to be involved in and even ongoing events globally.
All right. So next Friday, and then we should say the speaker, Elliot Kleinberg, is on August 7th, talking about War in Paradise. Mayor Chris Hoffman, Susan Gold, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having
Appreciate
me.
it. Up next, local blood banks stress the need for summertime donations at a time of growing need.
Join WJCT Public Media and the Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens for a special screening of The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez, a searing 1982 Western hailed as beautifully shot and criminally overlooked. Gregorio Cortez tells the true story of a Mexican-American farmer thrust into legend after a tragic misunderstanding. Don't miss this one-night-only screening, Wednesday, July 16th at 7 p.m. at WJCT Studios. Presented in coordination with the Cummer Museum's exhibition Knowing the West. Details and tickets at wjct.org/film.
On the next Fresh Air, NBC News correspondent Jacob Soboroff joins us to talk about the latest ICE raids across America. His new investigation looks at who is being detained, including farm workers, day laborers, and street vendors, many of whom do not have criminal records. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Why is it that some people defy the odds and escape chronic diseases well into old age?
Basically, if you're over 85 and you don't have any of the three major age-related diseases, cancer, cardiovascular, neurodegenerative, then you've made it into the superager group.
I'm Deborah Becker, The Secrets of Superagers. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The so-called Big Beautiful Bill has taken a bumpy ride in the Senate. Lawmakers from both parties have pushed for changes to the massive piece of legislation that would touch just about every American. What parts of this GOP mega bill are you paying attention to? We'll answer your questions and talk about what you need to know in a big, beautiful conversation next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Donor blood supplies tend to dry up during the summer months, which is a time that blood banks need it most. Here to tell us about the seasonal shortage and how you can help is James Scahn. He's the District Recruitment Manager for Life South Community Blood Centers. Good morning, James. Thanks for being here.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So we talk about the need, and it's something that's sort of known, I think, within your circles and within the industry is 100 deadly days of summer. Can you explain kind of what drives the demand increase in summertime?
So during the summer, I think it's more just people not having the time. People are traveling. They've got their kids home from school. I mean, I don't know about you, but like with my kids, they're like feral right now. It's hard to like make plans. So the biggest ask from me or from Life South is for people to come out and like make an appointment, actually like make a plan to come out, because it's something you don't normally think about until it's right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
But summer is historically hard for us to get donors out to blood drives or to our blood centers.
People are on vacation. As you say, people are distracted. People are sometimes feral themselves, whether their kids are running wild or not. But there's also this kind of increase, and it may not be as pronounced in Florida, but in the summertime months, people are kind of out and about doing more things. They're often doing things that might be outside of their normal routine, things that can cause injury.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so with us, we're the provider for every level 1 and level 2 trauma center in the area. So that's kind of a huge part of this is locally, specifically, we need people to actually be regular donors or actually show up and or even host blood drives if they have a group that's interested. But yeah, it's more pronounced in the summer and even here, yes.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you're seeing things, I guess, where people are having, accidents. And the need here is obviously because people require transfusions. Is that kind of what purpose these donations serve?
Yeah. And depending on your blood type, there's other, sickle cell treatment. There are people contending with various cancers that you're treating with platelets. So it's not just traumas, but I mean that as far as our local cause, that's a big one. I mean that's a huge thing that I try to kind of impress on people is that this is your blood supply. If you're hurt in an accident, if you're God forbid shot or something, like that's where this blood's coming from. You're very likely being transported to either UF Health or Baptist, places we provide for rather. You're probably taking Trauma One or Life Flight to that we provide for them as well. JFRDs, ambulances have the blood on them, but that's a steady supply of blood that needs to be consistently renewed. It's not just like a one-time thing. There's a shelf life on it. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, does the fact that Life South services a local, customer base, do you find that that's important to people when you're messaging to them about kind of the need to donate? That this is something that could help their neighbors, their family members.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's my biggest pitch to people is like this is for you. This is your community. I mean, in addition, there's benefits that they can gain from it. I mean, it's a nice experience. You are helping people. You'll get some kind of a swag or a gift card or a shirt. A lot of community partners will also give away things. Like Fishware Brewery is nice enough to provide like free beer, token for people if they donate it.
Not while you're donating.
No, not while you're donating. That'd be kind of cool, but no. not while you're donating, but yeah, to renew later. Yeah, you can get things out of it too, but hopefully, I hope people understand the communal need, and that's their real driving factor.
Yeah, and we joke about it. I mean, there, in terms of who's eligible, they do sort of recommend that you haven't had alcohol within 24 hours.
Mm.
Usually, they ask that you're at least 110 pounds
Yes.
and 17 years old.
16 with parental consent. We
Okay.
have like forms that if you have a 16-year-old that's interested and is health, we'll give you basically a quick screening beforehand to make sure you're healthy to donate, regardless of your age and who you are. But yeah, we have like forms that a parent could sign for a 16-year-old, because we go to high schools. We do blood drives at the high schools too.
Sure. And other advice, just make sure that you've kind of had a decent meal, that you're not going in there on an empty stomach.
Yeah, stay hydrated, eat a good meal. Yeah, and just don't psych yourself out. I think a lot of people get it in their heads that they're gonna have a reaction, and that's pretty rare. But when they get it in their heads, their likelihood kind of increases. So that's another little thing to kind of think about. Like, cool down. You're doing a really great service for somebody. You can sit and scroll your phone while you do it. It's a pretty casual affair, and you're literally saving local lives doing it.
And I mean, another cool thing, and we don't have time to get into it especially, but you do provide some testing for pre-diabetes, cholesterol screening, blood pressure. So there is something that people can get for their own health out of donating.
Yeah, absolutely. Now through at least the end of August, possibly further, they could get the A1C testing, which it's a pretty imperative thing. If you don't know that you're diabetic, that's a good way to screen for it, to figure it out, or pre-diabetic, and that's something a lot of people are walking around not knowing.
Yeah. Well, we should say Life South is a WJCT underwriter. But James Scahn, thanks so much for being here. You can get more information at lifesouth.org.
Yes, please.
All right. James, thank you for being here. And
thank you.
Thank you for listening. That's our program. If you have questions or comments, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. Join us tomorrow when we...
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Tidbits, family owned and operated since 1985, offers dine-in, catering, delivery, and takeout at Bay Meadows, Hendricks, and Mandarin locations. Menu items include fresh sandwiches, salads, and soups, open Monday through Saturday. Online ordering and menu at clarastidbits.com.